Hi everyone, I pressed the pause button at the wrong time in my story, so I'm going to reread part one. For all of our Transitional English 2 students, we are reading the story Two Kinds by Amy Tan, and I just really love this story, so let's get into it. Some key vocabulary to know before we start the story together. A prodigy is a child genius. That word becomes very important in the story. Reproach is blame. When you're ambitious, you have a really strong desire for success. When you assert something, you are saying it very strongly and clearly. If you have an expectation, it's a belief that something will happen. An accusation is when you say that someone else did something wrong. When something is inevitable, that means it's definitely going to happen. It's unavoidable. It's inevitable, for example, that the sun will rise tomorrow. And if something is discordant, it's harsh and unpleasant. We're going to be studying this vocabulary later on in this unit, so I'm not too worried if we have these words perfectly or not, but let's go ahead and read the story. Part one. My mother believed you could be anything you wanted to be in America. You could open a restaurant. You could work for the government and get good retirement. You could buy a house with almost no money down. You could become rich. You could become instantly famous. Of course, you can be a prodigy too. My mother told me when I was 9. You can be best anything. What does Auntie Lindo know? Her daughter? She is only best tricky. America was where all my mother's hopes lay. She had come to San Francisco in 1949 after losing everything in China, her mother and father, her home, her first husband, and 2 daughters, twin baby girls. But she never looked back with regret. Things could get better in so many ways. We didn't immediately pick the right kind of prodigy. At first, my mother thought I could be a Chinese Shirley Temple. We'd watch Shirley's old movies on TV as though they were training films. My mother would poke my arm and say, "Nikan, you watch." And I would see Shirley tapping her feet or singing a sailor song or pursing her lips into a very round O while saying, "Oh my goodness." "Nikan," my mother said, as Shirley's eyes flooded with tears. "You already know how. Don't need talent for crying." Soon after my mother got this idea about Shirley Temple, she took me to the beauty training school in the Mission District and put me in the hands of a student who could barely hold the scissors without shaking. Instead of getting big fat curls, I emerged with an uneven mass of crinkly black fuzz. My mother dragged me off to the bathroom and tried to wet down my hair. "You look like a Negro Chinese," she lamented, as if I had done this on purpose. The instructor of the beauty training school had to lop off these soggy clumps to make my hair even again. "Peter Pan is very popular these days," the instructor assured my mother. I now had bad hair, the length of a boy's, with curly bangs that hung at a slant 2 inches above my eyebrows. I liked the haircut, and it made me actually look forward to my future fame. In fact, in the beginning, I was just as excited as my mother, maybe even more so. I pictured this prodigy part of me as many different images, and I tried each one on for size. I was a dainty ballerina girl, standing by the curtain, waiting to hear the music that would send me floating on my tiptoes. I was like the Christ child lifted out of the straw manger, crying with holy indignity. I was Cinderella stepping from her pumpkin carriage, with sparkly cartoon music filling the air. In all of my imaginings, I was filled with a sense that I would soon become perfect. My mother and father would adore me. I would be beyond reproach. I would never feel the need to sulk or to clamor for anything. But sometimes the prodigy in me became impatient. "If you don't hurry up and get me out of here, I'm disappearing for good," it warned. "And then you'll always be nothing." Every night after dinner, my mother and I would sit at the Formica-topped kitchen table. She would present new tests, taking her examples from stories of amazing children that she read in Ripley's Believe It or Not, or Good Housekeeping, Reader's Digest, or any of a dozen other magazines she kept in a pile in our bathroom. My mother got these magazines from people whose houses she cleaned. And since she cleaned many houses each week, we had a great assortment. She would look through them all, searching for stories about remarkable children. The first night, she brought out a story about a 3-year-old boy who knew the capitals of all the states and even the most of the European countries. A teacher was quoted as saying that the little boy could also pronounce the names of the foreign cities correctly. "What's the capital of Finland?" my mother asked me, looking at the story. All I knew was the capital of California, because Sacramento was the name of the street we lived on in Chinatown. "Nairobi," I guessed, saying the most foreign word I could think of. She checked to see if that might be one way to pronounce Helsinki before showing me the answer. The tests got harder, multiplying numbers in my head, finding the Queen of Hearts in a deck of cards, trying to stand on my head without using my hands, predicting the daily temperatures in Los Angeles, New York, and London. One night, I had to look at a page from the Bible for 3 minutes and then report everything I could remember. Now Jehoshaphat had riches and honor and abundance, and that's all I remember, Ma, I said. And after seeing, once again, my mother's disappointed face, something inside me began to die. I hated the tests, the raised hopes and failed expectations. Before going to bed that night, I looked in the mirror above the bathroom sink and I saw only my face staring back and understood that it would always be this ordinary face. I began to cry. Ugh! Such a sad, ugly girl. I made high-pitched noises like a crazed animal, trying to scratch out the face in the mirror. And then I saw what seemed to be the prodigy side of me, a face I had never seen before. I looked at my reflection, blinking so that I could see more clearly. The girl staring back at me was angry, powerful. She and I were the same. I had new thoughts, willful thoughts, or rather, thoughts filled with lots of won'ts. I won't let her change me, I promised myself. I won't be what I'm not. So now, when my mother presented her tests, I performed listlessly. My head propped in one arm. I pretended to be bored. And I was. I got so bored that I started counting the bellows of the foghorns out on the bay, while my mother drilled me in other areas. The sound was comforting and reminded me of the cow jumping over the moon. And the next day I played a game with myself, seeing if my mother would give up on me before 8 bellows. After a while, I usually only counted 1 bellow, maybe 2 at most. At last, she was beginning to give up hope. And that, my friends, is the end of part 1 of this story.